So today we're going to talk about reconciliation. As you know, I'm Julia. I'm the author of The Farmer's Office and a QuickBooks Certified Pro Advisor. For this module, I'm joined by Tim Biello, who's a farmer at Featherbed Lane. It's a diversified vegetable farm in New York, and they sell primarily through a CSA. And I wanted to thank you, Tim, for sharing your QuickBooks file with us. Reconciling is really difficult with a pretend farm. So you opening up your file and your numbers, which I know can feel very vulnerable. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me today with your QuickBooks files.
Happy to do it. I'm sure I'll be learning too.
Awesome, thank you. So a lot of people think, why reconcile? And especially if you're using QuickBooks Online and all of your transactions are downloaded into your QuickBooks file, it's kind of like, well, it's already reconciled. But it isn't quite reconciled. And as we know, cash is royalty. And it's really important to know how much cash you have in the bank at any given time. And there's a lag in the cash between what's in QuickBooks that you download from your bank feed, what you enter in. You may write a check, for example, for $2,000. You put it in the mail. The person receives it. They hold on to it for a day or two. They take it to the bank. And your bank doesn't know that that check was written for maybe a week afterwards. And if it's a big check, and I was looking at your file, Tim, you've got a couple of, several $1,000 checks. And if it hasn't cleared the bank, you go online and your bank doesn't know that there's $3,000 out in the universe. So reconciling your bank statement is really important so that you can make sure that you always know how much cash you have in the bank at any given time. And here's an example. This is sort of a classic example. Do you go online and check your online bank system to see how much cash you have, or do you trust your QuickBooks? And, here's a interesting example of total disparity. It's like, you have 38,000. Are you overdrawn by 1,000? And that can be disconcerting because as you're making big purchases, especially in the beginning of the season, you need to know what you have in the bank. So when you have that kind of disparity, we're trying to fix what's going on, and we want to, make sure all deposits have cleared and withdrawals have cleared. We want to make sure we've added all of our transactions. And by reconciling our bank statement, we can make sure that we have an understanding of those things. We can also enter in missed receipts and expenses, enter in any sales or deposits that we hadn't done. And sometimes there's duplicated transactions. I can tell you I do it all the time. I'm a little overeager with my QuickBooks, so I may enter in things twice. And interestingly enough, I was reconciling my personal bank account. I thought I had done a mobile deposit for a check I received. And when I went to reconcile my bank statement, it wasn't actually there. So I thought I had $1,000 in the bank that hadn't cleared. So it was important to do that step to make sure that the money was in the bank and I received all the payments from my clients. So in essence, when we reconcile, we're trying to reconcile, we're aligning what happened in the bank with what happened in QuickBooks, and all those things that we just talked about to enter in transactions that we may have missed, to delete duplicated transactions, and to make sure that we've got the correct amount on all of our transactions. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the bank statement and we're going to start and, side by side. Here's an example. And I just wanted to clarify for you all that, not everybody's bank statement looks the same. So we want to make sure that we sort of see the opening balance and the ending balance. And we're going to kind of go from here. And then we're going to basically look at our transactions in QuickBooks, which is over here. And we're going to look at our transactions on the bank statement, and we're just going to check them off. So let's go ahead and go to a real file. So to get to the reconciliation window, we're going to go to the banking tab, and we're going to click on Reconcile. And just for a point of reference, I'm using QuickBooks Desktop for Mac. And the functionality on the PC version is going to look more or less the same. And if you're using the online version, you're going to go to the cog in the top right corner. So I'm going to click on Reconcile, and we want to check the bank statement that we're going to reconcile. And I know that this is this is ATC Bank. We're going to reconcile ATC Bank here. And I'm going to go up to the top of the bank statement. And here is the beginning balance here. We see 517767, and we can match it up 517767. The statement date is 2/28. So I want to make sure that I change 022822. And the ending balance right here, I can see that is 28,556 and 60 cents. So I'm going to add that into the ending balance. All right. Now, sometimes it's hard to sort of see where this is, but you may have service charges. For example, if you have a minimum balance that you didn't hit each month, perhaps it's a $10 maintenance fee that you have for some checking accounts. So if you have a service charge for your bank account, you would enter that, let's say here, and we would need to assign it to a bank, to an account from our chart of accounts. And I might want to do bank fees, or whatever you have set up for your service charges. If you earn interest in your bank account, which I know is kind of comical these days, but maybe you got 30 cents in interest, wouldn't that be great? We would enter that in here as well, and we would do 0.30 cents, let's say, and it would be interest. And we would need this to be an other income account. So interest earned would be an other income account.
Okay.
So when we're setting up the account type, if we haven't already, we want it to be other income. We don't want this to be primary income because that, not that the 30 cents is really going to throw off our reports that much, but we want it to be other income so it doesn't mess up, when we look at our reports and we're looking at expenses as a percentage of revenue, we want to make sure that it's a percentage of production revenue. And awesome that you're getting interest, but it's not your primary business. So I'm actually going to cancel that since it doesn't look like you earned interest, and I don't want you to have that messed up. We'd be off by 30 cents.
Something to aspire to.
Right, exactly. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. Now, here we've got the list of all of the deposits that Tim made and all of the expenses that Tim made. And I'm just going to readjust it a little bit just to make it a little bit easier to see. And I know this might sound silly to be going through this trouble, but these are the little things that make it easier to kind of get through. You can organize your transactions by date, and I can click on date, and now they're organized in order of date, which is likely going to mimic what's on your bank statement. Depending on the number of transactions you have, I actually prefer to have them organized by the amount because, it's like, wait, where's that 3,000 and, the dates, and sometimes the clearing isn't aligned in the right order. So for me, I just organize things in order of the amount. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to see. And also, for example, if you've got a duplicated transaction, it's like, oh, we've got two $69 transactions here. It's easier to see if by accident you've duplicated anything when you've entered in, because they're in order of the amount and not necessarily the date. So now your bank statement, you have all the deposits and the credits in one section, and then you have all the withdrawals and debits in the second section. And some banks, they have them sort of all in order of date. So you may sort of need to jump back and forth between withdrawals and deposits, but you have it in sections, and it's in sections here. So it's pretty easy for us to kind of go through. So it looks like we've got 4 deposits here, and we've got 7 deposits here. So it looks like we probably missed a few deposits. And, which is not a big deal, obviously, but we just want to make sure that we're getting them entered in. So I'm going to actually start from the top to the bottom on the bank statement rather than starting here on the QuickBooks reconciliation. So we've got 4194 not on the list, so we want to go ahead and get that in. So I'm going to open up the Make Deposit window. And I'm going to just sort of pop it down here so I can see all three screens. We don't necessarily know who this deposit is from. In this received from section, we could put the customer if we know it was from a specific customer. And I know from your QuickBooks files, and folks can watch the video on daily sales receipts and messy sales transactions, and I'll put the link in the description. This is, the sales that you have, and we know that anytime you have a deposit, it's really a transfer from daily sales receipts. So we're depositing to the ATC account, and it's coming from weekly sales receipts. All right, so 419400. So we're going to go ahead and enter that deposit. Now, we know that there's a bunch that we didn't enter in here, but I don't want to just put them all on one deposit slip because, if I go back to sort of see, oh, what happened this day or that day, I really want it to match what happened in the bank so that there's no confusion and I can go back and retrace my steps if I need to.
Yeah, and are you doing this in lieu of doing a transfer? So if I've recorded it in the weekly sales receipt, would it show up there, and could we transfer it, or is this a better way to do it?
Oh, totally. It works both ways. So to your point, there's many ways to accomplish the same task. So in this case, I did it as a deposit just because we're doing deposits here. And I'm going to click save. And I'm going to minimize that window. And now we see 4194 shows up here, and I'm checking it off to see that it happened. On 2/8, we had a deposit for 63.56. And here we have 63.28. So I'm a little bit curious to know if this is a duplicated, if this is mistyped based on what's here, or if there's a second one. And because they're really similar in amount, the date range is probably close. I'm going to venture to say, and there's not another $6,300 deposit or so, I'm going to venture to say that this one was mistyped in. So I'm going to change that one to match.
That amount, I believe I know what that was. That's part of my confusion with dealing with the change that you and I have been working on.
Oh, yeah.
There was $28 and change that week, and I think I must have failed to transfer it over. Okay,
cool. So, and as you say that, I'm wondering if this 4052 is actually the same one as that, and that we just, that was another misentry.
Not sure. I can try and find out, but I don't know right off the top of my head.
Well, to that point, it's like it's around the same time. It's a little bit off. So it's probably a similar question. So I'm going to double click this one, open it back up. And I think, you know what? I think this might have not been the right thing to do. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this one. And I'm going to click OK and minimize this again. And I'm going to say, you know what? I think this one is probably that one. So I'm going to edit this transaction. And it popped up. And as you pointed out, you did this as a transfer, not as a deposit. And I'll click save and OK. All right, so now we're going to check that one off. I'm going to check it off. They match this 63.56. I'm going to edit this to match 63.56. And I'll click OK. Okay, then we have the 50.55, which is here. Then we've got three more transactions that are not here. So I'm going to go ahead and enter those in. And to your point, we could do it as a transfer, or we could do it as a deposit. So we're transferring it from weekly sales to daily to the bank account. We've got $2,000. And I'm going to change the date to match what you have, 021422. And we're going to do next. And then, so that just popped up in there. Do you see how that popped up in the reconciliation window? We just entered it in. I'll do the next one, 2052, and no change. Weekly sales receipts, same date. I'll click next. And then the third one is 20093.75. And do you think that was sales also, or was that something else?
That was sales.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. We'll click OK. So now we've got the 2000, 2052, and those three. And then we've got the 69. So now we've cleared all the deposits and the deposits match. Now we can see the cleared balance and the difference, and we're working towards getting to 0 with the difference. And obviously we're off by 11,000, but you've got quite a few withdrawals, and we can actually see we're pretty close. We can see the withdrawals were 11,000 here, and the difference here is 11,000 here. So we're pretty close. So we can start checking these off as well. So 402.48, I'm going to scroll down, 402.48, 1088.42, 1088.42. And it looks like we may have duplicated that transaction. That was an unusual amount. It wasn't an even amount. And I'm wondering if that's a duplicate. The dates are the same. And you and I had this conversation the other day. You had entered in the transaction twice, just, sort of a confusion about the process of entering payroll. So we know that this one we entered in via a journal entry. So we can see we entered in gross wages. And even though it's a journal entry, because we have that transaction that's hitting the bank account ATC, it is in fact showing up on your reconciliation statement, even though it wasn't entered in via check or deposit or credit card or whatever, it's still showing up here because we linked it to the bank account. Here you entered it in as a check, and we know that that was not correct, and it is duplicated. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. So I'm going to go to Edit and Delete, and I'm going to click OK. And I know I say never delete, but because the check hasn't cleared, I can see it's a duplicate. I know which transaction is correct. I'm comfortable deleting that one. All right, so we've got 1088.42. We only have one transaction there. 1978, 1978, 439.61, 669.82, 12.62 here, 12.62 there, 119. All right, and then we've got another check here for 2378.42, and I'm scrolling down and I'm not seeing that that payment right here. And I believe this is actually a loan payment that you made.
It is, yeah. So it would be entered in, I guess, in like four. Like it's two loans combined, and so then there's the interest and the payment on each.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and just write a check for this amount, and we'll talk about journal entries in another video on how to do this process. But we know this is a loan payment, so for now I'm just going to enter it in as so federal.
Would that cause it, Julia? Would that cause it to be duplicated, where the interest and principal, if they were entered?
So what we will do is, so we're entering this in as a loan payment, so 2378.42, and I'm going to call this loan payment, and this is an expense account. And because we don't know the breakdown between interest and principal, I'm just going to put it in sort of in a holding place as loan payment or loan repayment. And then when we have the breakdown from your loan statement, we're going to then separate it out between the interest and the principal. And we can go back and edit this transaction, or we can do a journal entry to sort of separate it out. And we do go over that in the video about general journal entries. And I want to make a comment. You bring up a really good point. Can you edit a transaction after it's been reconciled? And even though it's been reconciled and cleared, if we do not change the amount of the check and we only change the amount of how we separate it out in this section, we can make changes even after a transaction is cleared, but we just can't change the amount without screwing up everything else. So when we get your bank statement, we can go back and break it out according to the loan payment, principal, and interest. But for now, I'm just going to enter it in as loan repayment. And I'm going to click Save. And I'm going to go back to my reconciliation window. And we've got 237842. I've got 237842. I've got 306765, 306765, 583, 583, 1290.
This is a silly detail question, Joe, but are you just clicking on the line and it checks it off? Do you have to do it? You're just touching the line in it? Okay, so you don't have to go to that column. You can just.
Yeah, no, I'm just anywhere here. I can click here and it checks. To your point, I could certainly check over here. But yeah, so, I mean, that's actually not a silly point at all, because reconciliation can be sort of a pain in the backside. So, having a system to just power through it is, these little tips to make it go faster can really help a lot. Okay, so we just did $12.99. So the next one is $12.57.55. Thankfully, your bank statement's pretty robust in telling you where it went to. So this was high mowing. So it's easy to kind of backtrack. Oh, what was that for? So I'm going to go ahead and write a check. And I go to the write check window, and it was for high mowing. And the date of the check was February 2nd. So I'm going to change that date. It's not critical that you get the date right, but I find that, when you go back and you're like, oh, what did I spend on seeds? When did I buy seeds? And for budgeting for the next year, it really is helpful to know which month things happened in. And this is your COGS for potting soil. Let's see, I forget how we called it.
That's seeds. Those are seeds.
Yep. Okay. So I entered that in, and the amount was $12.57.55. If we wanted to break it down, you may have known that, oh, well, that was seeds and part of it was supplies. We could also break it down right here. I'll click save. I'm going to click back to the reconciliation window, and there it is, the $12.57, $32.28, $68.42. I think that's probably the same one, wild birds. Wild birds. Oh, whoops, it's not quite the right amount. We can double click it. And we can change it. And I'm going to change it to 68.42 instead of 65. These are minor things, but these are the little things that, they can add up over time, and you don't know how much you have in the bank. So 68.42, 18.99, 27.96, 49.99, 25.26, 39.06. That was square up, 39.06. So do we think that 39 here is the same as this one? It was just a misentry?
No, it's probably entered the 39 and the 50 I put together. So there should be an $89 somewhere.
Yep. Oh, there we go. Right. Okay. So this is actually an interesting point. We talked about it earlier. Do you sort of do a mashup of transactions into one? And as a general rule, while it may be a little bit more time consuming to enter in true transactions, when you go back to reconcile, it's like, how do you match up what happened in the bank with what happened here? And so just not a big deal. And you remembered, you knew exactly what that was. So that's great. And if you can remember that, fantastic. But for somebody like me who's, reconciling an unknown bank, and if you're hiring a bookkeeper to help you, it's helpful to really enter in exactly as they happen on the bank statement, so it's easier to reconcile.
Okay.
So these were sort of the online transactions. The second section of the withdrawals were checks. So we could sort of resort by check number, or we can just continue on in order of the amount. So 564.99, 564.99, 123.70, 123.70. I'm wondering if that was a typo or if that's a different transaction. What do you think?
Probably the same transaction, but typo.
Okay. And, if your bank sort of sends you with the checks, you can always, my bank sends me the little snapshot of the actual check, so I can always double check where the mistake was. And generally it was my mistake. Sometimes the bank can't read my handwriting and I might lose 8 cents. You can certainly fight it if you want to, if you notice that there's a bank mistake. For 8 cents, I think it's not worth my time, but if it's more, it probably is. So we had a 327.56 here, 327.50. So again, it could be an issue that the bank can't read your handwriting. So it's actually kind of interesting that this happened twice now on this bank statement. Okay, so we had 327.56, and then we had 69, and then we had 70. So we're off by $10, which is quite an even number. So I'm wondering if, that 564 was really 554, or where did we miss that $10? I'm going to double check. I may have misentered this 556.60. So if we're off by $10, being the neurotic person that I am, I would go back and unclear, unmark everything and start over to get it right. Not everybody wants to do that. $10 is not huge. So we could leave it if we wanted to. It's not a disaster. But you have to decide what's important to you.
What happens? So by leave it, you mean just don't do anything, or do you enter some amount of like a discrepancy entry to zero it out? Or?
Exactly. So if the difference is not zero, then, and you hit reconcile, here's the reconcile button, you hit reconcile, it's going to say there's a $10 discrepancy. So you can return to reconcile to try to fix it, or you can enter in an adjustment. So let's go ahead and enter in an adjustment. Now our bank account is reconciled, and we want to see if we want to run reports. I personally like to see a detailed report. And we can see that if you look sort of at this faded area, you can see all the transactions disappeared. And the only thing that's left are the things that did not clear. These are things that we entered into QuickBooks, but have not shown up on our bank statement. So I find it helpful to look at the detailed report. So here are the uncleared transactions. Here are those 5 items that didn't go through. I'm going to make the date range wider. So this check for on February 4th didn't clear. This may have been a duplicated transaction. You may recall we had another $70 transaction. So this may be a duplicate. These transactions were at the end of the month. The statement closed on 2/28. These were written on 2/25. So it could be that you wrote the checks and Lee and Jamie Lynn didn't go to the bank until March 1st to deposit the checks. So it's not that they didn't get to the bank, they just didn't get to the bank before February 28th, and they may very well show up on your March statement. So what I'll do is I'll leave these uncleared transactions here, and then at the end of March, if they're still there and they haven't cleared the bank, then there's a good chance that they were duplicated by accident and a misentered transaction.
And you catch that only because you look at your uncleared transactions month. You'll look back at months, or is there any other way that QuickBooks or something highlights it to you that they've continued to not be reconciled?
So when I reconcile for March, for example, I'm going to see uncleared transactions, and this 2/4 is going to still be in my March report.
Okay.
So I'm looking at the dates to see how long ago I entered them in compared to when I'm reconciling. And if the date is, 6 months past, it's like, you know what? I think I either double entered it somehow. Somehow the credit card charge didn't go through. I don't know, unclear kind of what happened, but a mistake was made. It didn't happen. So here I am on the report, and you can see my cursor. It goes from a cursor to a magnifying glass. So I think you and I talked earlier, and we think that this transaction was duplicated, and it's still here, in our bank account. So I'm going to double click on it. I'm going to sort of move my cursor till I get the magnifying glass and double click. And here's that check. It's from 2/4. And I'm going to go to edit and delete. And I'm going to click OK. So, and actually you can see after a check has been cleared, it's been reconciled, it's going to have this big stamp on it that says cleared. So again, we can change the how we allocated the funds, but we cannot change that $12.99 amount after a check has been cleared. So that is how we reconcile. I want to thank you, Tim, so much for opening up your company like that, because I think it's really helpful to see a real company being reconciled.